Welcome to On Top of the World, a world history podcast. I'm Dave Eaton.
And I'm Matt Derwinski, and welcome to a very special, not podcast, but video stream by Dave and I.
We pivoted to video.
It heralds
Only
our
5 years late.
5 years late. I mean, you know what they say, when you pivot to video, you're basically done. Thank you all for joining us and watching the stream, which is part of the really exciting Fiveable virtual summit for all of the AP history classes. We're going to focus primarily on AP World History, our field of study, but the stuff we're talking about here is going to be super useful for you if you teach or take AP Euro or AP US history, because the skills we're going to be talking about, the skills of document analysis, apply to all history, all the time, everywhere.
That's right. We are going to be doing a little sort of unit on how to use primary sources in the classroom. And I think this is a topic that we've all encountered in our classes. This is something that's essential to so much of what we do. On the other hand, it can be a real challenge to do it well. And so what I think we're going to try and do here is give people a sense of what we do when we're trying to convince our students to use best practices when they encounter a primary source document. And yeah, this is the plan.
Yep, that's the plan. This just my lovely wife walking around in the background. Don't be well. We have begun. So that's the plan, and this is actually an episode, a segment that our listeners have requested. So thank you for giving us this excellent suggestion of looking at some primary sources and really breaking them down as a historian would. On AP exams, in addition to the broader field of history, students are required to do a number of things, right? Not only are they required to just read and understand a document as you would any text, right? They have to read and understand a document as a historian would. And one of the things that we're going to really focus on today, the one that teachers and students have, sort of said to me that they struggle with the most, is the sourcing of a document. So let's break down what sourcing means. And this used to be, if you've been teaching AP for a long time, this used to be called point of view. And if your teacher calls it point of view, they're just still referring to an older thing. They mean sourcing. So what is sourcing, Dave?
But I can tell you that no one got those POV points back when I was grading the DBQs on that. It was always the worst.
Million of these essays, so we know exactly what are the do's and don'ts and the things you want to avoid. And this is actually the most difficult part of understanding any primary source, any historical text.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so again, you want to take a look at who the author is. Obviously, that's going to be basics. You're going to need the relevant info on your document. You're going to need to try and identify as best you can sort of the context, try and guide your students through what type of cues to look for in, say, the description of a document to be able to figure that context out. So we're going to go through some examples of that more specifically. You're also going to want to get a sense of the argument that the author of this document might be making. So having an idea what the purpose of this document is can really unlock, again, a lot of the type of contextual information that Matt was just talking about. One other thing is, what kind of info are you getting from this document that relates to a broader context? What details can you pull from the elements of the document itself that, again, connect to this larger context? And again, much of this will be connected to things like the relevant info, where, if you're identifying, say, the date that a document was produced in, that can then be the key to having your students be able to connect it to a broader context. Another thing,
So just to summarize Dave's points there, it's, we're talking about the author, right? The audience, maybe what type of document it is, right? Was it public or private? The date, And then you can look in the document to help you out a little bit by finding some of the like context clues in the document, right? Some information in there that can sort of tell you what kind of source it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is so important, right? Because knowing the situation in which the document was produced can be very, very helpful. Knowing who the intended audience was, those are other things that we can really think about. And then last but not least, looking at sort of either the credibility of the document or maybe some of the limitations to that credibility, which again is an issue that a lot of students struggle with. Yeah. Many of them, and we're going to look at this in a couple of examples. Many students tend to just take the document at face value. This is a primary source. It was written by someone who was there. Therefore, we just regurgitate what's in the document. And obviously, we want to try and get them past that a little bit in terms of thinking about why it might be written in a particular way. So those are the things that I've got. Is there anything you want to add there?
Well, no, I just want to say that's an excellent list of things to consider with students. How do you teach that to students? I would say, at the beginning of your course, or if you're a student at the beginning of the year, you want to take that critical look and take that same thing teachers are teaching you about and sort of meet yourself or meet your students where you already are with the documents and sources you're already familiar with, right? Think about the things in your own life, and that's what I kind of like to do with my students is at the beginning of the year, present them with some documents that are the types of documents that they read all the time, right? A note from teachers about homework, a text from friends, right? A Facebook post or update, and a Snapchat or an Instagram picture or story, right? And so at the beginning of the year, I don't think they had Snapchat last time I did this, but at the beginning of the year with my students, I would take, a Facebook post of mine or one of my friends, a text from a family member, right? And like a note or an email from like one of my bosses, right? And I would put all those together, right? And they would all be about the same theme. And students, because they're familiar with all these types of sources, they encounter them every day, right. They could practice the skills of identifying who the author is, looking at the date, right? They know how to read timestamps on texts, or whether like on one I had the whether it's been received or not, right? And the students love like noticing that,
Ooh.
right? To reconstruct an event, right? And then when you ask them one of the questions that Dave was asking, like, what are the limitations of this source? They can be like, well, the text from Mr. Lewinsky's, mom, she might not be around, right? She probably doesn't live with Mr. Lewinsky, right? But the Facebook post, that's a public document, right? All of his friends could read that, right? Whereas the text, it's just to that one other person, right? So start always, right? This is something we all know as teachers, or if you're a student, is start with what you know, right? Meet your students where they are.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea because, again, a lot of these skills that are involved in accurately analyzing a primary source document, these skills, I think, have a real broad relevance. And what you're doing right there, I think, really does help make it clear to students that this is something that you can use anywhere you go. That this type of being able to look at a document, analyze it well, such a useful skill. Can't emphasize that enough. Yeah.
Okay.
Are we allowed to start? Are we allowed to start?
Okay. I got one more point, right, which was getting back to what teachers asked us about, right, which is this concept of understanding sourcing, right, or as they used to call it in the AP program, point of view, and why students struggle with it and why it's so difficult, right? And at the end of the day, when you break down in all of your course guides or whatever your teacher has given you, they have some information on what the College Board on the exam requires for sourcing. But at the end of the day, it can really be summarized as connecting a document to something you already know, right? Mm-hmm. To put it most simply. To put it a little more historically, it's thinking about the context of the document, right? In a larger historical narrative or a larger historical framework of analysis, right? And that context can sometimes be created from just what's in the document and figuring out those context clues, or if you have a second document that you've been asked to analyze, by comparing them you can create the context. But really the best way to do it, and the most likely way you're going to do it, is to know something that's not in the document about what's going on in that time. And one of the great things about the AP exam is they're never going to require you to know something incredibly specific or minutia about what's going on. They're really just asking you to think of those big long-term trends, right? The 3 or 4 key concepts for each periodization of history, right? If almost all the documents can easily be connected and contextualized and sourced within one of those things. And we're going to look at some examples of that.